Ushaji,
Ayyo, kashtai, but you didn't remember me, no?
Ushaji preparing to live stream എന്ന് വന്നു. Ushaji
Ah.
പോയോ? അയ്യോ.
Now streaming live on YouTube.
You have the meeting streaming live on YouTube now.
Ah,
Usha evde?
She has come back.
I'm now joining on the phone.
അല്ല ഉഷാജി ആയിട്ടോ live on YouTube.
Okay.
Vannu.
Now you can do it on the cloud.
Record അല്ലേ?
Record cloudly ചെയ്തോളൂ. Because YouTube is already running.
അല്ല എൻ്റെ ഇതിൽ വരുന്നില്ല. So record also you do please.
Okay, നോക്കട്ടെ. Okay.
ആ.
അത് വരുന്നില്ല. റെക്കോർഡ് വരുന്നുണ്ട്. ഓക്കെ ക്ലൗഡിൽ അല്ലേ? ഓക്കെ, ഐ വിൽ ഡു ദാറ്റ്. Request the host to record to the cloud. Send request. Ushaji, I think host.
അല്ല അപ്പൊ start recording. ചെയ്യട്ടെ?
ചെയ്തോളൂ.
Shall we start?
ഒരു 2 minute കൂടെ നോക്കൂ ഉഷ.
Okay, okay.
Anyone is joining? 4:30
ഉഷാജി എന്റെ ഹോസ്റ്റ് മാറി, കോ ഹോസ്റ്റ് മാറി കേട്ടോ.
അല്ല അപ്പൊ അത് ഞാൻ റീക്ലെയിം ഹോസ്റ്റ് കൊടുത്തിട്ട്.
കോ
പക്ഷെ
ഹോസ്റ്റ്
അപ്പൊ അത് ലൈവ് പോകുന്നുണ്ടോ?
പോകുന്നുണ്ട് ഇപ്പൊ.
Good evening, Lal.
കോ ഹോസ്റ്റ് ആക്കിക്കോളൂ അപ്പൊ.
അതെ.
can't hear.
You're muted.
You're muted. കേൾക്കുന്നില്ല.
Oh, yes, I'm muted. Sorry.
Yeah.
Now we can hear you. So Nitin didn't tell you not to join?
No. Not at all. We are in 2 rooms, though.
Okay. Nitin seems to be all set.
All set.
Confident ആണല്ലോ അല്ലേ?
Ah.
No, I'm all right.
നമ്മുടെ ഈ ഇപ്പൊ രണ്ട് കഴിഞ്ഞ ലാസ്റ്റ് മന്ത് we missed it. We didn't have the അല്ലേ? കഴിഞ്ഞ പ്രാവശ്യം നമുക്ക് കൾച്ചറൽ ഫോറത്തിൽ we didn't have a speaker.
We didn't have. Yeah, അതെ. അപ്പൊ this is the 47th one, no?
Yeah, this is the 47th.
സ്റ്റാർട്ട് ചെയ്യാം.
നമുക്ക് സ്റ്റാർട്ട് ചെയ്യാം. Let others join.
We'll start.
റെക്കോർഡ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് കൊണ്ട് people will join.
And start, Jamila.
You don't want to start?
No, you can start.
Okay. Greetings to all of you who have joined us on this platform. We are very happy to be here again with our literary and cultural forum speakers and the program that we started 2 years back. This is our 47th talk under the Literary and Cultural Forum. Greetings to all the members of AIWC. I'm very happy that one of our senior members, Pulchit Ji, has joined us as usual. So welcome, madam, to the forum. And many others.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. And it's always an inspiration to have you there as one of our audience and the interaction you do every time after the talk.
My pleasure. I really love attending this seminar. I look forward to this rather. Last month you didn't have it. I really missed it.
Yeah. We had to miss last month due to unavoidable reasons, but here we are again, going still strong with our 47th session. As
to Australia this time.
Yeah. So greetings to all the other guests who have joined us on this platform and the well-wishers of our cultural and literary forum. Greetings and very warm welcome to all of you. And of course, a warm welcome to Nitin Lal, who is the speaker for us today. And he's going to talk to us about Australia's changing landscapes, from iconic landmarks to environmental shifts. He has been one of our resource persons for program that we did on empowering women, and he, together with one of his colleagues, made a very impressive presentation on climate change. So that was why I thought it would be a good idea to get Nitin to talk to us about Australia. Australia specifically because the area of research that Nitin is doing is about Australian theatre, and the topic that he is working on is the weird loops of perception in select Australian climate plays. He has been a student of the Institute of English and is still a student of the Institute of English as a research scholar working under Sujak Kurup. I hope you remember that in one of our earlier talks, we had Professor Sujak Kurup speak to us about Australia and Australian culture. So we have her student with us today to talk to us about the changing landscapes and the icons of Australia. Nitin has done a number of presentations at conferences, international and national. He has also been instrumental in organizing international conferences about Australian culture, Australian perspectives of environmental justice. He has also done a webinar on stories from down under gender discourses in Australia, which was organized by the Centre for Australian Studies. His academic interests are, of course, climate change, theatre, violence, hyperobject, climate change, literature, climate change communication, environmental humanities, sustainable education, and climate change education. So we have a speaker who has done quite a lot of research in this area on Australia and Australian environment and the changing culture of the landscape of Australia. So when I talked to Nitin to tell us something about Australia, he said, can I do something on the landscapes and the landmarks? And I think that was a topic that was close to my heart as well, because Australia has always impressed me by its natural beauty, its coral reefs, and its, of course, the Sydney Opera houses. There's so many icons that get associated with Australia. And no one can forget the role that they play on the cricket fields. But more than that, it is the multicultural matrix of Australia that appeals to the global population today. Many Indians have migrated to Australia, as also many from different parts of the world. It is estimated that something like 6.5 million people immigrated to Australia from different parts of the world after the Second World War. So if we look at the population of Australia, we have a whole group of Aboriginal people, native people, like in Canada and in US, who have been there for many years. And it's estimated something like 300,000 years ago, the indigenous people were already there. But it was only in the 18th century, in the late 1700s, specifically 1788, that the British sent their first group of colonizers. And this group, as we all know, were people who were sort of expelled from Britain because they were convicts and sent to Australia. But if you look at what has happened since then, the people who came there initially did not destroy the indigenous people as much as what happened in Canada or even in US. But there was enough space. It is one of the largest countries in the world, and of course a continent which has only one country, and that is Australia. So here we find people right from the beginning, enough space, enough bush country, as it was once called, for everyone to inhabit. Today also, if you look at the population, considering the dimension of the country, It is sparsely populated, like in Canada, but more than in Canada. And more people are going to Australia. Now, it is this rich mix of culture that fascinates an outsider about the country. On one of my visits to Australia, one of the things that attracted me was the Buddhist temple, the Nantian temple in Australia. The culture that was received with open hands in Australia way so many years back. The Celtic culture that came with the British, the European culture that came with the rest of the European countries and people immigrating to Australia. But like in Canada, in Australia also, we do not have a melting pot as one identifies with America. Americans and the white American is the significant, the American, the icon of the American. All the rest of them are just, planets revolving around the sun. But in Australia, if you look at the matrix of different cultures, one finds that it is a rainbow of cultures like their coral reef. And the coral reef is something that one can never miss in one's journey to Australia. The kangaroos, what are specific to Australia, like the kangaroos, then they have the polar bears. So these are all something that are very specific to Australia. So Australia is not like any other country in Europe, but Australia has a definite identity of its own, and an identity that is multicultural, that is a matrix, or what do you say, a mosaic of cultures, where everyone coexists very happily. Recently, I had one of my classmates for my PG go to Australia, and he has been making these visits many times because his son is there, his son and his family are there. And the kind of pictures, photographs that he keeps sending to all of us gives us an image of what Australia is, the fascination of the land still. That is to say that multi-story buildings and all those huge rise buildings that we find in most European countries, though they are still there, there's still a vast expanse of natural beauty and natural landscapes, and the way in which old heritage buildings have been preserved. So this is specifically Australia as a country which should not be sort of thought to be the same as Canada or America. Australia is different. It's a totally different country. So on this note, on the specificities of a land or a country that fascinates us, I would now like to request Nitin to tell us more about the landscapes, the iconic buildings there, and the environmental shifts that is happening to Australia. So over to you, Nitin, and we hope to have a presentation from you, which will be of immense interest and value to all of us. So to you, Nitin.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. I hope I'm audible. There is
Yes,
rain in the background,
yeah.
but I hope, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
you're
so thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'm really glad that I could come here and finally have this conversation with you, with all of you, because it's been over 2 months that you've been asking me to come here, but because of my physical health and issues, I couldn't. And I'm really happy I'm here. So I'll share my screen now.
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Is it visible in full screen?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay, great. So as ma'am spoke about the introduction, I will also be giving a brief overview of what is Australia to the white European settlers and how it came to be. So we'll talk about about that maybe for 10 minutes, and we'll go into the landscapes and the environment and the major shifts that are happening in Australia. So I just want us to look at this, where how Australia, the landmass, came to be. So in 225 million years ago, it was Pangaea, and then slowly the continental drift happened, and present day Australia moved away from the in the Cretaceous period. Australia moved away and to the corner, the down under. And here we have the map of Australia. At this point, I just want everyone to just look at it and see where all the places lie. So we have Western Australia onto the west, the Northern Territory or the Northern Australia, the Southern Australia, South Australia. There's three states now, and we have Queensland here, New South Wales here, and Victoria. So these are the 6 states on the Australian landmass, and then we have Tasmania on the south. It's a small island. So you just keep this in mind, and we'll move to the next slide. So Australia in the 1500s and 1600s was not discovered yet. And during that period, it was an age of discovery, and the people in the Europe, the voyagers and the philosophers, they started thinking. So we have mapped almost all the lands in the world that we know, and there seems to be an imbalance in the sense that the north part of the map seems to remain empty. And to that part, these people, the Europeans, gave a name, Australis, Terra Australis non cognita. That is the southern land yet not known to man. So you can see in the map, the whole Antarctic North Pole region is called the Terra Australia non cognita, the unknown land. And Australis is a term from which Australia emerged, and Australis just means southern, and Terra means earth or land. So this is how the idea or the concept of Australia emerged in the Middle Ages. So, as ma'am said, in 1778, the penal colony began in Australia. Before that, in 1600s, the Dutch came to Australia. They landed in the western coast, but they saw that there's nothing much to do here, so they went back. And what forced the Europeans or the British specifically to come to Australia is the revolution, the American Revolution in 1776, where America, which was also in a way penal colony, where the British, the unwanted people from Britain, was sent to America. But when America gained independence, they said, no, we're not going to entertain any more of your convicts. And they were forced to find a place, find a land where they could send their prisoners. And these are just a few information here and there. And Tasmania was known as sorry, there's an error in the spelling. It's Dimien, Van Diemen land, which later became Tasmania. That's also a short information that we can keep in mind. So yeah, here is James Cook, who came to Australia in 1770 in the East Coast, which is now called the Botany Bay. And 17 years later, with 1,400 people, of which 700 plus were convicts, Captain Arthur Phillip landed in Botany Bay. But when they landed in Botany Bay, they found out that it was not as good a land as what James Cook wrote about. And they shifted a bit north and reached the Sydney Cove, which is now called the Sydney Bay. And HMS Endeavour is the ship in which James Cook landed first in Australia. So the picture on the left is an aerial photo of the Botany Bay, and you can see the Sydney airport runway in that image. So James Cook landed here in 1770, and in the second picture, you can see Botany Bay in the bottom. That is where Arthur Phillip also came, but he found out that it was not a viable place, and they moved further up, and you can see the Sydney Opera House. There, in that small piece of land, he landed there, and that is where the first colony was formed. And as soon as they landed in Australia, what we call Australia, the conflict with the indigenous people started. So it's very important to talk about the indigenous people who are called the Aboriginal Australians or the First Nation Australians or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. So these terms are very important because the term that was used to note Aboriginals were Aborigine, which is now a bit of a derogatory term, which we should try to avoid. And we can call them Aboriginals, Australian indigenous people, or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. So as soon as they landed, these people have been here, were here for 30,000 to 65,000 years ago since then, and they are the longest continuing culture existing in our world. And the first attack to the Aboriginals was not physical conflict, but what happened? The diseases that the Europeans carried over. So smallpox was one of the biggest weapons that eradicated a major population of Aboriginal people when the Europeans started settling in the land. So which are the major British colonies? So like the 13 colonies of the US, which later became 30 states, we have the 6 + 1, 7 states of Australia, which initially were penal colonies. So in this map, this is a map from 1918. You can see the major penal colonies. Perth was a penal colony, and Victoria, Sydney, Brisbane, and Hobart and Lansdowne in Tasmania were also penal colonies. So it was around these penal colonies, small states came to being, and each state were governed by a governor, a British person who governed the land. So they had complete control of the people who lived there, including convicts as well as people who immigrated from Britain. So what led to the largest intake or immigration of people into Australia was the gold rush. So gold was discovered in New South Wales and Victoria, which led to a massive influx of migrants. So the date was 1850. So 1850s to 1890s, you can see immense migration, especially from China, America, and Ireland, also from other places. And when the 1900s, the 1890s hit, the stockpile of gold started to diminish, and there rose an economic depression from 1890 to 1900. And people were really unhappy. And the people of Australia at that point comprised of convicts who were emancipated and also soldiers who retired and remained in Australia, because at that point, you come to Australia, or if you're a convict and you're emancipated, you get around 30 acres of land, because as Jamila ma'am said in the beginning, land is plenty in Australia. And how did they start thinking about liberation from the British rule? So in 1900s, in 1901, on January 1, the Commonwealth of Australia was declared, and Edmund Barton was the first Prime Minister. And as soon as the Federation or the Commonwealth of Australia was declared, the first rule they brought was White Australia policy. So it's important to look at these major events in Australian history before we go to the rest of our session. So White Australia policy at that point itself, they declared that we are not going to bring any more non-European immigrants into our land. So they were already very strict about non-European immigrants. So we can imagine how they treated the Aboriginals. So as ma'am said in the beginning of the introduction, yes, Aboriginals and Australians always had, or the Europeans always tried to coexist in the beginning. But unfortunately, as more people came in, the conflicts also started to increase, and it was really difficult to create a balance between the white settlers and the Aboriginal people. And this got stronger with the White Australia policy, which generally did not invite anyone from outside Europe. This was specifically meant for the Chinese immigrants. So that is the setting. And now this is the white history of Australia. And as I mentioned in the beginning, Australia already had inhabitants. Australia already had inhabitants who are the Aboriginal people. And when we think about Australia now, we think about a lot of cultural landmarks. We think about the marsupial animals, including kangaroo, and the vast lands. But who really owned those lands? So the concept of ownership itself came with the European settlers. So Aboriginals never had the concept of ownership. They had their own belief systems, and which included the land the nature and the people, which definitely include the animals, insects, and plant life with it. So there was huge shift when the white settlers came in and they pushed in advertently or inadvertently the aboriginals into way I could say non-existence. That I said that because in today's Australian landscape, though aboriginals are represented, the aboriginals are recognized, they do not have the voice in the parliament. So voice in the parliament is a struggle, a constant struggle the Aborigines have been trying to reach for over a century now, and we'll come to that in the later part. So this is a short, brief history of how Australia came to being and how the British colony became the Australian Federation and it became the Commonwealth of Australia. So today we'll look at 4 landscapes, 4 iconic landmarks of Australia, and how they have been represented and how they have changed, and who are the real, who are the people who really own, if I can use the term, own or are part of that land. Because whenever a European or a colonial empire comes into a land and takes over that place, they make everything their own. And they will create a narrative where they'll make sure that the people who are there are not equipped or competent enough to keep or hold that land or that culture. So the first place we'll be looking at is Uluru or Ayers Rock. So before I show the image, I think you the audience here must have seen this in movies or documentaries. And it was called the Ayers Rock. So that is the English term for the mountainous structure that I'm going to show. And Uluru is the indigenous aboriginal term. So even the shift from Ayers Rock to Uluru was after a long battle with the government. So this is Ayers Rock or Uluru. This is significant landmark in Australia. And it has deep cultural and spiritual importance for the Anangu people. Anangu people, I'm sorry, I might be mispronouncing the terms, yeah, apologies for that. So Anangu people are the original inhabitants of this land. When you look at this land, you can see it's a deserted place. It's just this one big rock, which is actually, the circumference is around 9.4 kilometers. It's huge. But the indigenous people, they walk a lot, they travel a lot. So what they do is, you can see even in this image, there are places where you have shadow regions. So when they're traveling from long distances, they use these spots to make bread, because they can pick berries and resources from the nature, and they make bread, or they stop a while to rest before they continue the journey. So what happened to Uluru? So Uluru, it became a big tourist site. And even in movies, there are scenes, I think there is in one Tom Cruise movie, there is a scene where Tom Cruise hangs from the Uluru Rock trying to climb it. And it became a huge cultural phenomenon as well. But the original inhabitants, or the Anangu tribe people, they were not happy with what was happening to this place, which is a very important monument in their culture. And after a long protest in 1985, the Australian government declared the Uluru Rock and the area around it as Uluru Kata Tujuta National Park, and the rights were given to the Aboriginals. So this we can see throughout Australian history, where land ownership is given to Aboriginals. But what we need to understand is, though they are given the ownership, they're not allowed to do anything on the land. They're not allowed to construct anything. They're not allowed to cultivate. So they cannot do anything with the land. They have the ownership, but the true ownership still remains with the Australian government. So this is the contestation that has been going on for, as I said, for over a century. And here also we can see that example. But the importance is that finally the Australian government recognizes that this is a part of the Aboriginal culture and they have to step back. though it created immense amount of tourist income for them, they decided to step back. So in 1985, this happened. So here, despite the return of the title deeds, Anangu people face challenges in managing the park and preserving their cultural practices due to the increasing number of visiting tourists. So even though this in 1985, the land title deeds were given to the Aboriginals, the tourists did not stop coming. And this only ended in 2019. So 1985 to 2019, it took such a long period to reach a place where the Anangu people finally got the land for themselves. So this is a photo from 2019 where the Anangu people, they have set a board there, no walkers or climbers, because climbing and walking on the rock, which is a very important spiritual religious rock for the Anangu people, is sacrilegious. So finally in 2019, they were able to permanently close the rock to climbers and tourists. So now if you go to Australia and if you want to see Uluru, you can only stay, I think, a few kilometers away and watch it from a distance. You're not allowed to even go near it. So that is a huge shift and change, which is a progress towards the acceptance and recognition of Aboriginals in Australia. So now the second landmark that we'll be looking at is the Darling Murray Basin. So in this image, you can see the left river, that's Darling River, right river, that's a Darling River, and left it's a Murray River, and they're joining in the confluence. And this is like a snake winding all across eastern Australia, and it's a major water source for a lot of cities. And this is also major water source for a lot of indigenous tribes living, indigenous communities living in Australia. So what happened is during the initial period of the colonial rule in Australia, they constructed dams, they cut out tributaries from the river, and they mismanaged the basin so much that the water content of the river diminished. And this led to a threat where slowly and with exacerbating climate change events, the Darling Murray Basin would, in 100 years, completely dry off. So in 2012, the government initiated a policy, started a plan to revamp and resurrect the Darling Murray Basin. And the plan was supposed to complete in 2024, but the Australian government has not been able to meet the target, and they have pushed it to 2027, which is a concern to Australians because Australia has been seeing climate events one after the other since the 2000s. And and because of a lot of other climatic events, which I'll speak about, are happening around Australia, the chances that the people or the government will be able to retake the basin is less. So the people and communities in Australia are trying to push for a faster resolution to bring back the Darling Murray Basin. Yes. And it's a huge economic factor also, because Australia is a country which its economy is based on agriculture, cattle, including cows and sheep, and fossil fuels. So a river source like this is very important for them because almost all the agricultural land in Australia benefits from these river from this river basin. Okay. So these are I've already spoken about this. This is what is happening to the river and what they're trying to do. So the plan is called Murray-Darling Basin Plan, and it started in 2012, and it's supposed to complete in 2024, but they still have not completed it. Okay. So now we reached the beautiful, the majestic Great Barrier Reef. So in the map, it's a bit unclear, but you can see where the geographical location of the Great Barrier Reef. It's on the east coast, the northern east coast, and it lies like this. And these are the images, the photos, the plants and animals that exist within the Great Barrier ecosystem. So this is a huge ecosystem, which for us human beings is a marvel to visit, to do a scuba diving and see the animals and plants that live within the ecosystem. But for the creatures that living within the coral reefs, it is a haven. And the problem is that all across the globe, coral reefs are dying. The reason is because, as we all know, global warming. And the global warming is not just the warming of the atmospheric temperature, it's also the warming of the ocean. And the ocean temperature is increasing drastically. So we don't feel this because ocean temperature increase that do not directly affect us, as people who live in cities, who does not live in the coast. But people who live in the coastlines do feel the difference. But for us, most of us, we don't think about it. But the plant life within oceans, even a small, minute degree of variation can affect their existence. It is a live or die situation. So now the next image is this. This is the current situation of over 70 to 90% of coral reefs across the world and 70% of coral reefs in the Great Barrier Reef. So there are a lot of reasons for this. One is, as we know, it's us human beings, the practices that we do. And the other is the bigger impact, the climate change and global warming. And the oceans in and around Australia has been warming at a rapid rate. And this is affecting the coral reefs. So bleaching is basically what happens when the temperature changes. It can be temperature change or the alkalinity, acidity, or the chemical variation within the oceans. The algae, which gives the color to the coral reefs, gets stressed. And these algae will leave the coral. And this will give it a white color. If you have seen a coral, so if you go to Kanyakumari or places like that, you might see you can buy coral from shops. It will be white or a creamish white color. So when the algae leaves, it reaches the creamish white color. That is the bleached coral. So this phenomenon is called coral bleaching. And it is happening all across. So the main dates are 1998, 2002. So in 1998 and 2002, El Nino and El Nino are two weather phenomena which control the atmospheric weather and the oceanic temperature. So in 1998 and 2002, there was this phenomenon, but that was isolated events. But since 2016, this has been a recurring phenomenon. So 2016, we had it, 2017, we had it. And since 2020, we have been having a sustained level of coral bleaching. So this is a huge concern for the Australian government as well, because it's not just that we should conserve the beauty of the coral reefs or the life of the coral reefs. The other major important factor for the Australian government is that it is a huge tourist attraction, and it brings in a lot of money for the Australian government. So there are a lot of emissions and plans to regrow the reefs. So when coral bleaching happens, if it's not too intense or if it's not fatal, the corals can regenerate the algae living in it. So the government is trying to bring that back and to revive the reefs, but science and the yes, ma'am.
Go ahead, no problem.
Okay. So the rapid changes in the climate and where we are headed, it's unlikely that we will be able to revive the coral reefs as fast as required, because the bleaching is happening at a rapid pace, and the changes are not receding because the climate is changing at a rapid pace as well. So, but we are trying our best to bring it back into its older glory. So that is about coral bleaching and how it's affecting the majesty of the coral, the Great Barrier Reef. And another enemy of the corals are crown of thorns starfish. It's called crown of thorn because of the shape of the thorns on top of it, which is like the crown worn by Jesus in the story of Bible. And what they prey nearly on all types of corals. So what they do is they come, sit on top of it, and slowly suck the nutrients and life out of it. And it can eat their way through around 10 square meters of it a year. So, and because of the changes in the ocean, which both chemical and heat.
Then you're offline.
No, he is still there, but I cannot hear him.
Current വല്ലത് പോയോ?
No, he is still present in the meeting.
His audio is also on, but
I know.
Wait for him to come. Maybe some problem with the network.
yeah.
Nitin, we can't see or hear you. Karandu. Okay. Karandu പോയി like
ഞാൻ വിചാരിച്ചു.
the electricity പോയി അപ്പം give him 5 minutes to get back. Maybe he has it later.
He'll rejoin.
Yeah, he will rejoin. While we are waiting for him, something that struck me while he was talking about Uluru Rock was this, if it is not a rock, the Grand Canyon in the US. And fascinatingly enough, in the Grand Canyon, on one side is maintained still by the US government, and the other side of the Grand Canyon is maintained by the Aboriginal people. And if you go to both these sides, one of the things that you find on the Aboriginal side is that there is no fencing. Like you can go straight up to the Grand Canyon, and many people have fallen off the cliffs and all that, but they do not believe in constructing artificial constructions on the Grand Canyon. But on the other side, you have the fencing. And of course, it is, as Nitin was telling us, it is a tourist attraction. And a lot of people go to that side because you can see it without falling off the cliff. But on one of my visits, I was able to go to the other side, the indigenous side of the Grand Canyon. And they have been able to preserve their culture, their food, their representation of the raven. As they say that the rock itself has the image of a raven. And if you look closely enough, you see the raven there. And the raven is a symbol of their worship. So the Grand Canyon and nature and the land for the indigenous people, like in Australia, is something that they worship. And they do not see it as something with which to make commercial, they do not use it for commercial purposes. So that's, I think in Australia also, particularly when Nitin was talking to us about Uluru Rock, he said there was a time when visitors could go up the rock, but then once it got handed over to the indigenous people, because it has a spiritual and cultural impact on them, they do not allow people now to climb. I didn't hear.
No, Nitin is back. That was some disturbance.
Okay, Nitin, we are ready for you.
Yes, I'm really sorry for that.
Oh, that's okay. I filled in the gap, so go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, I was talking about the ocean chemistry. And because of that, the population of crown of thorns starfish is also increasing exponentially. And now the Australian government have started plans to slowly either capture or eradicate these starfishes, because they do not only eat up the ecosystem of the corals, but inadvertently the other beings that live among the corals are also affected. So that is what I want to talk about, the changes in the Great Barrier Reef or the corals. Yes. So yes, now we'll go to the Sydney Opera House, the iconic symbol of Australia that we all, I think almost all of us, when we think about Australia, we think about this particular building or structure. So this is a theater. Basically, this is a theater. In the 1950s, the Australian government, so Sydney was a prominent place in, prominent city in Australia. And there was this, when we think about the capital of Australia, we usually might think about Sydney or Victoria, Queensland, or places like that, Melbourne or Victoria. But there was this tussle between Sydney and Melbourne of becoming the, like, who wants to be the capital. And finally, it fell on Canberra. So Canberra is the capital of Australia, just a little bit of info there. And yeah, we'll back to Sydney Opera House. So the structure of Sydney Opera House is very interesting. So this is in the Sydney Harbour. And in the earlier map I showed, you could see that jutting out of the Sydney Harbour. And the structure of these shell-like pieces, the roof structure, is based on sails of ships or sailboats. So that was the idea behind it. And on the right, you can see an image of how it was during the construction. So the story of Sydney Opera House is also interesting. So in the 1950s, they wanted to have a monument which will stand out, and they set out a competition. Around 200 entries came in from all over the globe, and one was selected, of Jean Utzon. So he was a Danish architect, and the interesting thing is that when he drew the conceptual graph of Sydney Opera House, he had no idea of how to build it, how he was going to build the roof or anything of that sort. So he drew a design and sent it, and that got selected. And that led to a lot of delays at the end. So Jean Utzon is a Danish architect, and in 1959, finally the work began. Even when they began the work, they did not know how they were going to build the roof of the opera house. And the initial budget was $7 million, Australian dollars at that time. And the project was supposed to complete in 1963. But because Utzon did not have any idea or needed more time to find a way to build his design, it went on for a longer period. And the government changed, and the new government was not keen on going on with the project, and they wanted to finish the project as early as possible. And there were conflict or problems between the government and Utzon, and finally Utzon left the project in 1966. He never came back. He did not come back to see the project completed. And the problem was Utzon's initial ideas were left out. And the new architects and the new engineers brought in their own concepts when they completed the Sydney Opera House. So the Sydney Opera House was completed in 1973, and it was opened by Queen Elizabeth II. And the final cost from $7 million came down to $102 million. And Utzon was later in the 1990s brought back by the Australian government, and he was set to oversee the completion of the Sydney Opera House, and also to maintain the renovation process. And if I'm not right, Utzon died in 2008. And till date, the renovation as well as the corrections of Sydney Opera House are going on. The corrections, what I mean is, because Utzon left in between, the new architects did the work as they deemed fit. But unfortunately, because of the broader design or the bigger design was Utzon's idea, the new things that were built by the changed architects did not come as planned, and there are problems in the acoustics in the theater. So those things are still under construction. So today, definitely Opera House stands as a monument, as a remarkable building, which everyone who know about Australia can relate to. And today what happens is, whenever they have a very important event, that can be their Australia Day, or as you can see in the image, when the Australian bushfires hit Australia, they uses it as a projecting board and showcases events like this, where during the Black Summer bushfires, they celebrated the firefighters who faced the flames, and their photos were projected on it. So that is where we leave Opera House. Today, symbolically, Opera House is famously unfinished because it's still under construction, and it, as a metaphor, like Australia, like the Sydney Opera House, Australia is also going through a lot of shifts even now. And that brings us, we have like 5 minutes, I think. That brings us to the 50th anniversary of the Opera House. And that coincided with the referendum. So as I mentioned earlier, the Aboriginal people, though they have given title deeds, rights and things like that, they're not part of the the Australian government. So Australian government did not recognize the Aboriginals' membership within the parliament. And the voice to parliament, or the term voice in the Australian context, is very important. So the voice is the indigenous voice to parliament. So in 2017, they tried to bring that into effect. It was called Uluru from the Heart, Uluru Statement from the Heart, which was the First Nations voices in the form of representation within the Australian Constitution. But that failed, that did not go through. And the latest was in 2023, where it was supposed to go to vote in 14th October 2023, and it went, and it did not pass. It did not receive enough votes to pass into the Constitution. So even today, the Aboriginal voice is, we can say, unheard. They are not part of the Constitution. They do not have membership within the Parliament. So when you're talking about Australia, it's very interesting, because in countries like New Zealand or Norway, there are indigenous tribes who still live there and who coexist within the mainstream government or mainstream people. So in Norway, we have Sami people. The Sami people, they have their own way of governance, which is recognized by the the government of Norway. Likewise, in when we come to so in the Sami people, the parliament, they have a parliament, and they meet twice a year, and they address all the problems of the people of the Sami population. And likewise, when you come to New Zealand, we have the Maori. Maori also have a parliament. They are also represented, and their problems are also listened and acted upon by the parliament. So representation as well as action is there in these regions. But in Australia, irrespective of the century plus struggle, they have not reached that place. So in that way also, the unfinished endeavor of the Sydney Opera House reflects the unfinished journey of the Australian Aboriginals. So this is where I would like to leave this talk. We have spoke for 40 minutes. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Nitin, for the very interesting presentation. You really took us. Oh,
Yes, ma'am. I just stopped the sharing.
yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you for that very interesting talk. You really took us to the coral reef and the Opera House. As you said, the Opera House, where the acoustics is not always the same in all parts of the building, and it's constantly under construction. So that was a very interesting talk. Now the paper is open for discussion. Your comments, questions you want to put to Nitin. I have a final question for you, Nitin, and I would like to hear something about the topic of your research, which seems to be very interesting and which talks about the Australian climate place. So we'll keep that till the very last, but the floor is now open for questions.
Yeah, I would like to just add to that to tell us something about the climate refugees, because I think Australia is one country which is facing a huge problem because of the climate refugees. If you can tell us about that also, that is linking to what Dr. Jamila Begum has just mentioned. Along with that, you can tell us about climate refugees also.
Okay.
And also about the status of women. Usha?
Yes,
Yeah.
the status of women.
In Australia, yes.
Yeah.
So I'll club that and speak at the end. I'll connect all that and speak at the end, right?
Can I ask something? Can I discuss?
Just to add to that question that has been raised, this is a note that I got, which says women's suffrage in Australia was achieved from the 1890s, and women became eligible to vote in South Australia in 1895. This was the first legislation in the world permitting women to stand for political office and in constantly evolving the key foundations for the elected parliamentary government. And this has been continuous from the 1850s into the 21st century. So women hold a very prestigious representation in the parliament.
Yeah.
Yes, Nitin, anything to add to what I just said?
Oh yeah, yes, ma'am. So when you're looking at the history, or when you're looking at the current political and social setting, we do not find there definitely is disparity when it comes to women, but whether it's in the indigenous peoples or the modern population, Australia seemed to be more balanced when it comes to the power between the men and women. So as you said, as the example stated, I think I agree with you on that now.
Yes.
Can I say
Yes,
something?
Kamini. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
That was very interesting, Nitin. And you're talking about Uluru and rock and all that. And I'm very happy to hear that the ownership is now bestowed on the local people. And they've also made it a point not to allow too many tourists, isn't it so? Yeah.
Yes. Now we have completely stopped. Yeah.
Yeah. That's always it, because recently, I think Spain and all, they have put up protests and all, saying that they don't want extra tourists at all.
Yeah.
Because of many reasons there. And this barrier reef, is there anything that is being done to solve the problem of bleaching of these reefs?
Yes, ma'am. They are trying to. The thing is that it's in the ocean, and the chemistry of the ocean, it's very hard to control it or contain it. So what they're trying is trying to take specimens and find ways to bring it back to its own old life. So that is being done. And also one major resolution that the Australian government has taken up is killing of the crown thorn starfish, because that is also a result of the climate change and the changing chemistry of the ocean. So that is being done. Yeah.
But it better be fast about it, because it's losing its glamour. That's what I'm hearing, isn't it?
Yes.
So
And
it's
it's
not
at a
the same.
very fast rate, and almost over 70% are bleached. That is a huge number. And
Yeah.
And if you even now, when tourists go there, if they want to see the corals that we see in images, they have to travel further, or they have to go to other locations now. So it's not like how it was back in the old days. So I mean, I think that a lot of other places as well. Yeah, it's happened.
Starfish, is it edible? Then people can eat it, no?
Yeah, but I think the shell and the thorns on it is difficult, because there are I think there are sea turtles which can eat it. But the problem is that the number of sea turtles are decreasing. So that is another reason the starfish population is rising, because the sea turtle are affected by the plastic pollution in the ocean. The plastic get trapped in them and they die. They die. And the number of these sea turtles are decreasing at a rapid rate, and that's one reason why the starfish rate is increasing. So the natural prey of the starfish is going down. So the whole dynamics within the oceanic ecosystem is changing. And final result is what we see from above. That is the change in the coral reef.
It is very sad, because one thing one of the important landmarks in Australia is this, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
The colorful reef.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for your wonderful presentation, Nitin. All the best.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Yeah.
It is not only the reef, it is also all the fish that is around Australia, because Australia has the sea all around it. And there is a depletion of that also, goes along with the depletion of the coral reef. Yes, Boneshwari wanted to ask something.
Yeah, no, actually, I really like the way you ended your presentation, how you compared that, Opera House unfinished and Aboriginals situation. That was very interesting. And you took us through all those places, the coral reef and Opera House and other places which through your presentation. That was very nice. And I was, when you were talking about the coral bleaching, I was remembering that recently we had a webinar on oceans that Dr. Sheila from Trivandrum, she had taken a webinar on oceans and how the ocean is affected, how the ocean has been helping us, plus how the ocean is affected by the climate change. So like the way you said about the coral bleaching, she was saying about the acidification of ocean water and how the shelled marine life particularly is in danger. And I just, because most of you would have attended that meeting, one important thing she said was, which is very alarming, all the carbon dioxide that the ocean is absorbing is stored underneath, in the deep inside the sea. If some glacier, something is, melted and there's a heavy flow, there's that danger of the carbon dioxide being pushed out and we'll be really doomed. So that sort of, these sort of things I was just remembering when you said, and how we need to protect ocean. And I think the United Nations has also recognized this concept of protecting oceans, and UN decade of oceans they have declared. Anyway, that was very nice. You have, along with Australia, you have connected it to the climate change, which is one subject I'm sort of dealing with. And thank you for that. And
whenever anyone thinks of Australia, one thinks of the huge expanse of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. Yes. It's surrounded by the oceans.
It's a beautiful place, and you have taken us through that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Jamila ma'am.
Yeah, sure.
Good evening. Good evening, Nitin, dear friends. Actually, it was a well-structured presentation on Australian landscapes. I was struck by the structural beauty of the presentation, because Nitin took us along the aerial view of Botany Bay, then I was also impressed by the copy of map which he reproduced, which was found in May 1918 or so by Edmund Blue. So the way you carried us through the island continent of Australia was rather really captivating. So and also moving on to the presentation of presentation on Australian landscapes. Your presentation actually beautifully captured the diversity and majesty, as Jamila ma'am had made clear in her introductory remarks, the majesty of Australian landscapes. And along with that, you had offered a deep appreciation for its unique ecosystems with special emphasis on indigenous knowledge systems. So that's what struck me the most. So it was a captivating exploration, Nitin.
Thank you.
You have done us proud. Yes.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
thank you, Jamila ma'am, for giving us
Thank you,
this
Suja, for
opportunity.
coming in. We
Thank
recall
you.
your presentation many months back. Oh, it was one of our early sessions. that
Hats
we
off,
had. And I
hats off
think,
to a great initiative, ma'am.
and I think, Nitin, you should put up your collar because you have got a very good compliment from your research guide.
Happy. I continue about the point that Bhuvneshwari ma'am was talking about the oceans. So, ma'am talked about the carbon dioxide which is stuck in the glaciers. So that's the permafrost. It's called the permafrost. And so glaciers, we age the glaciers by drilling into it, and it's like the tree rings in tree trunk. You read the carbon dioxide concentration at different points, and that is how you understand what was the carbon dioxide concentration during a particular period. So now, because of glaciers and because of the land masses of ice are melting, the methane, the carbon dioxide that was stuck within the ice is also melting and coming out, which will exacerbate the rate of global warming and climate change, as ma'am said. And also in the oceans, we are talking about acidification, and acidification will finally affect the plankton life, will affect the small the living beings in the ocean. And these small living beings play the biggest role in maintaining the ecosystem within and outside the oceans, because these planktons and green beings, they take in the carbon dioxide within the ocean. And when they die off, the carbon dioxide sequestration also goes down, and the carbon dioxide in the oceans increase, and acidification also becomes more. So yeah, it's a very important point that ma'am raised, which is also something we are which effect we are going to face in the future years. And thank you, Suja ma'am, for the kind words. I'm really happy that you were able to attend and you liked the presentation. I'm really glad for the support. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, any other questions?
Yes, may I say a few words?
Yeah, sure.
Yes,
We
the
can't see you. Will you adjust your camera a little bit?
Adjust your camera.
That's it. Yeah, now we can see
That's
you.
better.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Nitin. It was a beautiful presentation. You took us all, especially the Uluru rock was beautifully depicted. But my concern is that when Aboriginals, they are the original owners of the country, how come they don't have any voice in the parliament? And UNO is keeping quiet on that, or are they doing anything for that?
Yes, ma'am. So what happens when a colony is formed is the settlers, the people who come from outside, they have more power in all means. Maybe the military or maybe the knowledge system. No, that is a question which we can talk about later, which I would like to talk about. So when they come, the first thing they do is to shun the people who are living in the land as people who do not have ownership of the land. So terra nullius is the term the British colonizers gave to Australia. It's a land owned by no one. It's owned by no one. So they came in as a saviors to protect the land, to expand the land, and to cultivate the land. So yes, so I was researching on this for this, and I watched a YouTube video where they were talking about the referendum I spoke about, the voices. And in the comments, it's very interesting to see Australian people, they do not want this voice to come out. They just want things to go as status quo, because they don't want the shift in the parliament. They don't want an indigenous population to be part of the white Australian society. Because if we go back in the 1900s, the first law they brought was the White Australia policy. They did not want the people of color or people from different ethnicities to live among them. And that still exists. So now what Australia is facing is a housing problem. So they have, as we know, they have huge, massive land, but they're not able to construct houses because there are rules, very strict rules, which are maintained by the older society, or to the newer generation who are in the 20s and 30s are not able to build or bring about anything in the land which is available vastly. So if that is the policy they are following to the Australians, the white Australians, you can think about how they see the Aboriginals. So that disparity has been persistent for the past 1.5 century since they landed in Australia, and that has not changed. To please the government at that point, to please the people whenever the ruling parties coming into power, they will do one single act. They would do like, okay, this goes to the Aboriginals. So the Uluru title deed goes to Aboriginals in 1985. But it takes 34 years to finally stop tourists from entering the land. And in 2008, Kevin Rudd, the then Prime Minister, gave a formal apology to the native people of Australia. So that was also verbal, that was said and done. And the Australians, the white Australians were really happy because, okay, so we have done that. We have recognized them. But unfortunate thing is that unless you have a voice in the parliament, you cannot do anything for the people. So that is the problem we are facing. And there is racism very much prevalent within Australia. So what I wanted to do here was to show the other side of Australia. We see Australia as a capitalist country, a huge economy, but there is this side to Australia.
Dark side.
Yeah. And recently I was talking to, in 2023, me and my guide, we were able to go to Europe to present a paper on an Australian seminar. There I met a few scholars who are working on Australian studies in Europe. And we meet occasionally for discussing books. And in the last time we met, one of them were talking about their experience when they went to Australia. So they took a cab and they were having a conversation with the taxi driver. And they asked, like, what is your view about Aboriginals or Indigenous people? So this is a random person who is a white Australian. And that person who said, like, no, there is no need for voices for Aboriginals. We are happy as it is. We don't need them coming and living in our spaces. And the racism and the discrimination is very much prevalent within the white Australian society even today. So unless that changes, there won't be, because even in 2023, the voices referendum did not get voice. It was rejected. And they're still struggling to get that voice heard. So yeah, but it's very interesting to see, because in Mexico, in the US, in Norway, in New Zealand, all these countries, the Aboriginal, the indigenous people are recognized. In Australia also, they are recognized, but not as
Given a voice.
Yeah, given a voice. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
What about Canada? Are the Aborigines recognized in Canada?
I think that, oh wait, let me check, ma'am. I think that.
Oh.
Yes, there is a Nunavut government in Canada. The Nunavut tribe in Canada, they are recognized by Canada, officially recognized by Canada, and they have a voice in the parliament. So in Native America, Native American tribal governments is within US. So there is a Native American tribal government in US. So they have a voice as well. So definitely these voices won't be as much or as loud as what is the mainstream American or mainstream Canadian, but at least they have a voice. Australians still, though they are appeased or acknowledged as part of Australia, they're not really part of Australia. And the irony is that they are Australia. Whatever we call Australia today, because when I read about or think about Australia, that is something that confuses me a lot. We keep on saying Australia, Australia, but Australia is not really Australia, right? So Australia was, and there were around 500 tribes, 300,000 people, 600,000 people who lived for about 65,000 years. And then only 200 years back, a few people from Europe landed there and they made their own country out of it. So the question about what is Australia or who is Australian is also very important, I think, at this point. And I think that is what the Aboriginal Australians are trying to speak out about. Yeah.
Actually, when the Britishers, they came to India, at that time, the land was not owned by the people of India. It was just land, and anybody who was going to saw that land, they will get the whatever money outcome of that. And but after few years, the system started that the people, those who were working on that land, they became the owners.
Yeah.
But initially, when the Britishers came, the system was like that.
Yeah.
So same must be in Australia also, but it didn't change with time. No?
Yeah.
Very sad, very sad. My
They-
whole impression of Australian is totally changed.
I think the whole question of ownership of land is very important here, because for the indigenous people, they never talked about or even thought about owning the
Yes, very right.
because the
Very right.
land was something that was very holy and sanctified. for them.
Yes, yes.
And talking of Canada, the Nunavut territory that came into being very recently as a state, they were actually recognized by the Canadian government. And it is, as Nathan says, the Aboriginal people, the Nunavuts, with their language, who are able to use their language in their small state. So that's a recognition that Canada has given Native people.
The native.
There is, as you said, there's a long history of massacre, of violence, of diseases that were spread. This happened in all these countries wherever there was British colonization.
Same happened in India also. Same as the
Yeah.
condition in India also. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Very nice to listen to you also. And the
Thank you,
presenter you bring, they give lovely presentation. Lovely presentation.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much
Very
for the
nice. Right.
I thought we would have a young speaker for today. But
Yes.
one interesting thing that I wanted to ask you, along with the other about the place, this river is called Murray-Darling Basin. Was there any specific reason for naming it the Murray-Darling Basin?
Some romantic story.
The etymology behind the naming of the river.
I did not, maybe there is, but I didn't come across it. But Murray and Darling both sounds like an English name, and most likely those are names of a British person who found it or explored it, and they are two different rivers who meet. So maybe, yeah, if you
No, I was
think about it-
joining with the word darling, you know,
Yeah,
the
darling, yes,
the
yes, yeah.
name, but
joining at one
something
point,
that is
yes,
very dear to you, the
Yeah.
basin
Yeah, but
as a
I'm
darling to you.
I've not looked into it, ma'am, but yeah, there is a possibility. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the
Please look
rivers they
into it.
met,
That
so
sounded
that's why
very
they're using the
interesting.
word
Yeah.
darling.
Yeah?
You said,
Both the rivers met, no? That's why. Darling.
Yeah.
you said that river basin, it's drying up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Same story everywhere.
I know.
Yeah, I just looked up because I just looked up and found that that particular geographical geographical location spans the Murray River and its confluence with the Darling River, as our friend just now mentioned. Darling River in northwestern Australia, Victoria, and southwestern New South Wales. So it's a confluence of Murray and the Darling rivers, maybe.
Yeah.
We have a river named Darling.
But why the name Darling came? That is what
That's
intriguing. I thought it was something I heard by mistake, but then I saw your slide. Oh,
Yeah.
it is written.
Yes, ma'am.
I also thought, you know, darling river, so the river basin embraces.
Only a person of literature can ask this question.
Yeah.
I know.
Mahila ji.
Hmm.
If that is all from the desk, can you just tell us a little about your climate place and the question that Usha raised?
Yeah.
ஒரு நிமிஷம் மீரா, ஒரே ஒரு நிமிஷம்.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Krishna Umar, you wanted to ask something?
Yeah.
Yeah, please do.
Hello, ma'am. Yes,
Go
ma'am.
ahead.
Shamila, ma'am, shall I go ahead or
I thought Krishna Umar wanted to ask something.
No, nothing, ma'am. Very interesting program, ma'am.
Okay.
Very
What about Srigala? Okay, Lal, don't want to question your own son?
No questions, ma'am. Maybe I'll add that about the river basin. The Darling happens to be the name of the river.
I
And
know,
it's
it's
a
a
basin
name. I
form.
understand it's
So
a
the-
name. Yeah.
But altogether, it has created a romantic kind of
Yeah.
feel. And may I make a comment to Dr. Kamini had mentioned the solution to coral reef. We need better find some solution very quickly. And I'd also like to add that it's a part of a bigger problem, the global climate issue that we are facing. So maybe we will not be able to protect the coral reef by taking measures only in Australian region. Perhaps the world community, the global community need to stand together and work on it as it is currently doing its best, I believe, so that we'll solve related problems across the world. So it's a simple, not a simple issue, which can be addressed on a local level. Well, but I'm very proud and happy to see Nitin speak about his area.
Very good. Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Nitin, for your final summing up with your place.
Yes, ma'am. So my research, when I was looking at climate, I want to look at climate change literature, and because climate change, as the term denotes, it's a science. Climate change is a science. So people in humanities, when we talk about climate change, it's really difficult to comprehend climate change because there are a lot of statistics, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of science, like El Nino, La Nina. We hear about it now in the newspapers, but we don't know what it is. We don't know about the weather systems and things like that, unless you're keen and interested. So I was interested to know how through arts and literature, we could talk about this science, or how this could be communicated. And in India, unfortunately, we have not started maybe the local or regional examples, but as a national, within national literature, we are not speaking about climate change. In the fictional level, we have non-fictions. We have Amitav Ghosh and people like that writing about climate change. But in Australia, but in India and like other countries, we are hit by climate change, ravaged by climate change, but we still have not reached a point where we start talking about it in a larger scale. But in Australia, they have been hit by climate change multiple times. We know about the Australian bushfires. Now we spoke about the Darling-Murray Basin. We spoke about the coral reefs. And the people are very active in resisting or bringing out their voice to bring about change in the policy level. Likewise, in art and literature also, this is happening. And when I looked at that part of Australian literature, I found that theatre seemed to be doing a huge job. So since about 2006, 2008, climate plays have been produced. So these are not plays who see a doom in the future. Climate change is a doom event in the future. These are plays who take events from the current global scenario, including the Australian political, social, and economic stages, and produce plays. So here I'm looking at about 7 climate plays produced from 2008 to 2018, and looking at how these plays differ from each other and how they are trying to communicate the problem of climate change through that medium. So I'm only looking at the text because performance aspect is, I might not be able to look at that part because of various other factors. But when I'm reading these plays, what I find is, so there are different ways in which it is portrayed. So, and one play clearly voices this problem of how a scientist is trying to speak about climate change to the masses, but his words are drowned by the politicians or the media powerhouses, because he comes into the front and he tries to speak about climate change, but all this that comes out are jargons. But a voice of a politician will come and he will speak, but that will be boisterous, that will be romanticized, and the voice of denial will surface and succeed over the voice of reason or a voice of climate change. So that is just one play, for example. So I'm looking at, that is how my study is progressing, ma'am. I'm looking at how communication can work through these plays, or climate communication can work through these plays. So, and how,
so these plays are not about what happens to the people during these points of climate change.
They are about
how their lives are affected.
Yes.
No, I asked this because you talked about how a scientist tries to.
That is one play, ma'am. And that is in one play, that is the main theme. Yeah.
But so otherwise, it is a human angle.
Yeah, it's completely, even that there it's a human angle, because there is this thing called climate anxiety, which it's getting momentum these days. Like climate, like the called depression, we have climate depression as well. This is also happening for the new generation that we call the Gen Z, the 2000s born the generation. It is a official condition. The climate anxiety is a recognized condition. So that is all. So these things are addressed within these plays, and the helplessness as well. So in one of the plays, there is this blogger. So she documents all these events, but she sits in a completely closed environment where she's safe from all the climate events happening around, and she sees through a glass window what is happening to people, the refugees, and all that. When she blogs, but she's unable to do anything about it. She reaches a point where she reaches a point of action, but then she decides inaction and stays within the confines of the safety of the space. So these are the different ways in which these plays talk about climate change. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
And do these plays refer to how indigenous people are affected by these?
Unfortunately, at the point where when I was selecting the plays, my focus was not on indigenous population, and they are all non-indigenous. Yeah, so there are places who which does focus on indigenous population, and interestingly, in India and in India also, the indigenous population are really talking about climate change. Maybe not in terms of climate change, but in their own way. There are forms of art which reflects what's happening around them. Yeah.
Or in terms of the visual.
Yes.
When you talk of climate change in literature, in the Madhrubhumi Literature Festival here in Trivandrum this year, there was a panel discussing exactly this, how climate change is being portrayed. And there was a book release. Unfortunately, I don't remember the name of the poet, but one book of poems, and all the poems dealt with climate change. And then, of course, one book that I can mention just offhand is Hungry Tide.
Yes,
Hungry Tide is a book which really, puts the horrors of climate change into your head. And the other book, the Great Derangement,
Yes,
that is not fiction, as you said, it is not fiction. I attended a conference in Dhaka, Bangladesh. Bangladesh, actually, they say it is the showpiece for climate change action. They do a lot one is because they face a lot of problems, much more than many other parts of the world. And then the other thing is a lot of money is coming into Bangladesh for climate action. So they are doing a lot of things as well. So there, in this conference, they had staged a number of plays. You are working on plays. These were all Bengali plays, and all were dealing with climate change, different aspects, how they are facing, and the horrors of climate change, as well as how they are adapting to the different changes that are happening. So there is a lot of work going on in literature around climate change, because it has to happen. Whatever happens in our life, that has to get reflected in literature. And this is one of the major challenges that we are facing now. So definitely more and more books, I'm sure, will come out on climate change, fiction, non-fiction, plays, everything.
Actually, this also takes us to this question of the experiencing self. When you are writing, as you say, from behind a door, and you are not really going through the experience of the climate change or the havoc that is wrought, the experience that comes from the experiencing self and the one that comes from just the observer's side are totally different. And I think in literature, you have to address that, the kind of difference that happens, which we call appropriation. It's actually an appropriation of voices that the writer uses.
And you mentioned indigenous people. In one of these webinars we had, you remember that was about a tribe in Kerala, and he read out some of the poems written by the tribal people, and I think many of them dealt with the changes that are happening around them. As Nitin said, they don't specifically say climate change, but then the changes that are happening to nature, to the ecosystem around them, and very beautiful poems in Malayalam she had read out, if you remember.
It is Lakshmi Priya from Institute
Yes,
of English.
correct,
Yeah.
right.
Because recently Wayanad came into picture, right? Like the landslide, and for obvious reasons. So before a few months before that, I was speaking with an ecologist, Dr. Shanti, and she was talking about she usually visits the Wayanad every year. So she's been doing that for many years now. She was talking about how things have changed in Wayanad. So normally when she goes there, it's cool. She doesn't need to even put on the fan. She stays in a room without fan, and she's very comfortable. And when she goes into the forest also to meet tribal people there, the fauna and flora, it's very much alive. But last time she visited that, I think it was this year, 2024 summer, she was talking about frogs and tadpoles, which are not roadkills but dried up. So small water reservoirs were not there anymore, and the ecosystem is also vanishing. And this was a precursor to the Wayanad landslide. So but unfortunately, we don't see these images, or we don't see these instances. But what I noticed recently was I was reading this book called The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Colbert. And she talks about the first chapter is about frogs in Chile. There's frogs in a Chilean forest, and how suddenly a group of yellow frogs vanished. So a species was started to get extinct over weeks and months. And at the end of the chapter, she talks about you don't need to go to a forest to see this. You can see this around your backyard or around your own environment. And then I was thinking about frogs and toads. And when I was younger, during rainy season, I used to go out and, I mean, you might find it a bit unappealing, but take these frogs and play with them and leave them back. There are small frogs and big toads. There's a common sight. Even till 3-4 years back, in my front yard during rain, there would be frogs. But now you don't see them. You have to hunt for them to find a frog, and you might not even find a frog. So what is happening in front of my house? What is happening back then we used to play on the road, and on the side of the road there'll be small plants, and in between them there'll be small frogs, and we collect them, play with them, and leave them back. But today, one thing, people don't play on the roads. That is a completely another discussion. But these small things are also changing. Our changing ecosystem is also something we are not noticing. We're not thinking about it. But there's no complaining about it. That is how we are. That is how we are made up. But what I believe is that once each individual starts to have that recognition, we also will start doing things as a collective. Yeah, I think that is the only thing we can do. Let's start with small changes. Yes, yeah.
So thank you, Nitin, for that very interesting presentation. It was more of a dialogue, and we all were able to put in whatever to contribute our thinking. And I think all of us really enjoyed this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
and
ma'am.
thank you all the members who joined us on this platform. Thank you, Usha, for being the host, and Bhuvneshwari for keeping things going. This is recorded on YouTube. And what has happened recently is that people who cannot join us on this platform, they go to the YouTube. So we get a lot of hits on the YouTube, sometimes going over 100. And I'm sure this one also will have many such viewers. So thank you very much, Nitin, for being here.
Live is always more interesting than the YouTube.
I know.
Jamila ji, there are one or two comments in the chat box.
Yeah, I saw that. The one that
about the river.
One was just saying that this is beautiful, the crown starfish. Asha made that remark. And Lal has said the river named after the explorer Sir Ralph Darling, as Nitin guessed. So on that note of Darling, let us wind up this session. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Lal, for joining us and sitting through. Thank you, Suja, for being there. And I'm sure Nitin has done you proud by his presentation, very well presented. And thank you all of you who have joined us. Usha, we would like to
Yeah,
say
just
something?
to
Yeah.
wind up, thank you, Nitin, for that excellent presentation. And as you can see from the interactions we had, everybody was impressed with the way you presented Australia and the different aspects that you presented. And in Jamila's introduction, we noticed that you do a lot of work on climate change. And AWC is also involved in a lot of climate change work. So we would like to remain connected with you to take your help in doing some small climate change projects. Because one project that I came across recently was by a Pakistan NGO. They are developing a curriculum for school on climate change. So I thought that was very interesting, something to start with the children and teach them about climate change. And I was just wondering whether we can take up such a thing, maybe at a lower level, right from the beginning, or maybe in the middle school level. So we would like to take your help in doing something like that, something different. So that will be very interesting. And as Jamila said, it's very refreshing to have a young face, because mostly our speakers are older people. And so it was nice to have a young person come and tell us about. And of course, climate change is a thing that young people should talk about more, because it is their world that is getting affected. For older people like us, we have, covered most of our journey, and we are on the way out. So the next generation and the younger people, you should be more concerned and you should be taking more action about it. So that was wonderful. I thank all my friends from AWC who have joined, Puljeet and all others. And I thank our earlier resource persons have joined, some of them. And then the other people from non-AWC, those who have joined, I thank each and every one of you. Next month, as usual, we'll be having a webinar under the Literary and Cultural Forum on the first Saturday. And we'll communicate the details later. We are, I think, still working on it, Jamila.
Yeah.
So we'll announce that later. And we may, since the AWC, big team from AWC is attending the UN Climate Change Conference in Baku. So we were hoping to have a pre-COP webinar just to brief members about what is likely to be discussed there and which are the hot topics that are coming up. But we have not been able to work out anything. It is starting on 11th of November and goes on till 22nd of November. So maybe we'll have a post-COP. We'll have a webinar post-COP where we can speak about climate change in more detail and about the negotiations and other things. So with these words, I think we can wind up. Thank you, Jamila, for keeping this going. 4 years is not a short period. We have kept it going for 4 years, and we are trying to plan a big event for the 50th episode. So let us see what we can do. And thank you, Bhuvaneshwari and Kamini, for helping me to host this webinar. This is hosted by the Literary and Cultural Forum on the AIWC Trivandrum branch. So thank you, all of you, and hope to see you again at our next webinar.
Thank you, Usha.
Please stay connected.
Nice
Yes?
to see you. Nice to see you.
No,
Thank you
nice
so
to
much.
see you.
At least I can see your
As
face now.
Jamila said, now more people are watching us on YouTube because this time is little inconvenient for many ladies. Sheila, she has also joined.
Oh, Sheila's joined.
She is always there.
Thank you, Sheila,
Thank you for joining.
And a lot of our other people are watching on YouTube, and we see that usually within 2-3 days of our LCF webinar, the viewership on YouTube crosses 100, which means the people are getting to know about our webinars and they are following us, which is
becoming popular.
Yes, we are becoming, but I wish more people come for the live sessions because, as Puljeet said, joining the live session is, of course, different from
it,
what
it feels like we are seeing each other, no? At least once
Yeah,
in a way.
yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. That is right.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye bye. Happy
Bye.
Diwali.
Bye.
Thanks. Thank you. And special thanks to Jamila, because in spite of her health issues, she has been helping us to hold this regularly. So thank you, all of you, and I'll end the session now.
Thank you.
Today she is in lovely silk suit.
Yes. Just back from a review with the doctor.
Hmm.